All right, so questions around this morning or anything left over from yesterday? I did get one question late yesterday, so we'll go ahead and start with that one while you're thinking about it here. The first question here is there a way to get all the cost share program information available in one spot for federal, state, and NGO? And Cassie actually said she was going to help me get an answer to this, so go ahead, Josh.
Yes, so Josh Wagner with the Conservation Districts, but the Association Conservation partnered with NRCS to create a one-stop shop place for all partner organizations. It's conservesd.org. It's the Dakota First, or Dakota Network, Dakota Conservation Network is the name of the website. But anyways, the website is kind of, any partner agency could load their programs into this website, and it's kind of beneficial to partners to know what's out there, and it's also beneficial to the producer or landowner to go onto that website. You're able to scroll for your area, filter for your area, or filter for what you're wanting to do, water quality, soil quality, air quality. So conservesd.org is the website. So I think it was launched last year, so it's kind of in creation a little bit. But yeah, if you're a partner, you just submit your program. They'll load it up on that website. It goes through a review process. But yeah, if you have any input on how that operates, I think you can contact the creators of that website as well and leave your input if it's helpful or beneficial, that website.
Okay, thanks, Josh.
Yep.
Another person brought up yesterday the Habitat Pays website. So if you are a landowner and you are looking for technical assistance or someone to help you think about or work through your project, someone that's going to be pretty knowledgeable about this, these programs, you could go to the Habitat Pays website. That was another, you hit a link on your way over there. You opened another one. There you go. I think if you scroll down, they have the Habitat Advisor. There it is, second one from the left. If you click on that, it'll give you a statewide map with all of the Habitat Advisors from various organizations, and you can, as well as their contact information. So if you're looking at doing a project, you can go ahead and get a hold of them. All right, any more questions on seed mix, seed viability? Got one right down here. Bulk harvest.
This existed for you, Pete. Would you recommend to always send a sample in for testing prior to planting, like if you buy purchase seeds?
So the question was, would I recommend getting your purchase seed tested? I would say no. I think that generally speaking, you can trust all of the numbers that are coming from the seed houses. The thing is that you could do it. I did it out of curiosity across multiple seed lots. Every seed test that you order, whether it's from NST Labs or SDSU, or I know that there's a North Dakota lab. I mean, there's probably 6 of them within a reasonable shipping distance for us. They're always going to get something different. One's going to find a weed, the other one isn't, you know, and so you gotta, to me, it's different than the soils test. The soils test we talked about being important for making really good decisions and informed decisions that, you know, do the kind of the go, no-go decision. On these seed tests, you bought it already, you own it, you know, what are you gonna do different, even if something like that would show up? Now, if you have a suspicion of a seed lot, I think where's that suspicion going to come from? I think if you have a gut feeling that you do or don't want to work with a particular seed distributor, I think go with that gut feeling. But as far as buying and then paying for tests after the fact, I'm not sure that I've seen enough to warrant that I would give anybody that advice at this point. Do it if you're curious, but you know, I don't think there's a big red flag here at all. So.
How about on bulk harvested seed? Do you recommend a seed test on that?
Absolutely. So the question on bulk harvest, yeah, I think that bulk harvest, you can definitely get data that helps you become way more informed on your decisions based on what's in that and what the viability is, especially if you're targeting, say, specific rate that you want to try to, bulk harvest is messy and it's super fun, but you can pursue more informed decisions by getting those tests done. And the teal tests run about $40 to $50 per species. So there we always just kind of try to save a little money, maybe do the top 5, top 10. But I think it's an interesting thing when you send in a whole seed lot and you say, tell me what's in this. Because a lot of times that's how you get your seed list. And then if you're trying to, and we're going to talk a little bit more tomorrow on the idea of where do we go with bulk harvest seed kind of in an innovative way. I didn't want to take a bunch of time to do that here and now. But it can help with informing your decisions. So.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to add is when you buy seed from a seed dealer, as a producer or as an agency, make sure you check those seed tags pretty close. We did have examples this last few years where we're getting 0% germ because they didn't test for it yet. So that throws a red flag for our programs and everything else. So make sure you check those seed tags before you purchase that seed and bring it out.
Jay, say that in a different way. So you're saying that you had a seed tag on an ordered lot, and let's say you ordered 4, 5, 10 species, whatever, and one of the species you ordered, the tag actually listed it as 0% on the germ?
That would be correct, Pete.
So you bought, and they sold you that?
They didn't sell me that. But
Okay,
it
well,
was
that's
sold that way. So
that's-
yes, there was a lot to do there to straighten that out. But just as a producer, make sure that you're
Wow.
getting what you're paying for.
Thank you for sharing that. I didn't know that.
All right. Any other questions? Oh, question right here.
I'm sorry, I'm not as knowledgeable as all the rest of you, but in this discussion of bulk harvest as opposed to purchasing, the pluses and the minuses, if I'm going out, what money why do I bulk harvest as opposed to go to a seed dealer at Melbourne and say, I want this kind of seed?
Great question.
So why bulk harvest to begin with? When you're I'll kind of speak generally for everybody, like Fish and Wildlife Service, game fish and parks, Nature Conservancy. You got to remember we got a mixed room of landowners and say young professionals that are just kind of getting into their groove as managing land. So bulk harvest really comes into play on like agency land that's agency owned, where they've got a seed source that they want to propagate across a larger area. So Fish and Wildlife might have done, let's say they've got a native prairie that they burned that really came back well with a lot of variety of species, or maybe they've got a planting that they did previously that's producing a lot of good seed. Bulk harvest that to do the next project. Remember yesterday when you were talking about brome, like this is one of the ways to combat the brome invasion across the landscape. Just kind of keep chipping it away, incorporating good seed sources into those sites. There's techniques for that. Kyle's going to touch on that later. So that's one reason one might bulk harvest. As a landowner, though, I look at it much differently. I'm like, if you've described, like in your case, you've got some pretty good stands of warm seasons, right? They grow there. They're doing well. If you've got the equipment, the time, the energy, the desire, the curiosity, why not use your seed from your own place? And if, let's say you've got an acreage of a field that you're like, yeah, I'm not gonna use food plots anymore on that. I'm not gonna crop that anymore. But you got this seed source right next door that's your own. Why not try to grab some of that seed and use that versus buying it off the shelf? Just a money savings thing. But But there's caveats to all this, right? It's a money savings thing on the seed, but the cost, effort, time, energy of doing it is not cheap either, right? So it's just that's why we're talking about it. It's just an option for folks.
Pete, do you want to touch briefly on one of the things you did on your recent seeding where you actually harvested hay?
We're talking about that later today. We've got all that in a
Yeah,
presentation.
but we're talking
later.
about it now with bulk harvest.
Well, but I got pictures. It's fine.
Okay.
So
That's-
and
that's
you'll see it. But
another
I actually hayed some off and used did a round bale processor project. So we're going to talk a little bit about those home variety things coming up.
Is that in the last session?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
In our
So
innovation
that's
session.
kind of the extreme of bulk harvest. Take everything and move it, and then you got all the seed with it.
Yeah, the question was dollar and cents kind of trade-off, and I don't think that I would say I'm advocating for that bulk harvest is so easy that you should just do it, right? No, there's a few things that have to line up, but the thing that I'm trying to say is that we can know more about it, because in the past we would just harvest and distribute and maybe not put much science behind it if we were trying to figure out what our seed rates and stuff like that are. If that becomes an important thing to know, seed testing can help us know it, versus just guessing. I think that was the point I was really trying to drive home.
Joe, I figured you would talk, so.
Pete, we didn't talk about the sample sizes. So we're talking a lot about submitting samples, but how big is the sample size that's getting submitted?
Yeah, the sample size that you submit is kind of up to you. The sample size that they test, and I really do apologize. I actually thought that these screens were going to show that in a bigger, that everybody be able to see it. So I skipped that because it was getting in. But the sample size that they grab for a weed test, or for a bulk harvest seed test, it's about 70 grams out of what you provide them. Okay, so about 1/5 of a pound is what it comes down to. Then they grab a subsample of that for weed testing, which ends up sometimes only being about 4 or 5 grams because it's a more intense test. So that's where the whole thing starts to kind of roll up. What are the chances that that small sample is really going to tell you all of everything for the seed lot, right? So yeah, I mean, but it's lab testing. That's all they can really handle.
Are you going to talk later about Laura Perkins' work too with the Native Plant Initiative, or is that not necessarily? That's a lot about developing local ecotype and adapted seed as well. That's what I thought you were going to talk about, Joe. That's an advantage of bulk harvest in some ways. You know what you're getting off of native prairie.
We could just give a plug for that program. I mean, if you're a restorationist and you're doing I would say a small scale stuff, I don't want to, garden variety stuff or slightly larger. They do sell these local ecotype seed sources out of the SDSU Native Plant Initiative. So if you're looking to enhance a butterfly garden or a pollinator planting with something very specific, I don't really know if it's more affordable or not. Some of them you can buy as plugs, right? Is anybody more knowledgeable about that in the room than you want to talk about?
She was my professor in college, and I used to work with her. I guess I don't know so much on prices, but you can buy plugs through that. She also, I know, has journals she collaborates with a few other professors at other universities for. But while she kind of has been focusing more on the small scale garden variety stuff recently, she taught a ton of classes as far as larger scale restoration work. I know she's done a lot of work with prescribed burns, and we would even take tours to Millborn Seed in her classes. So
I got a quick question. How much does that seed test that tells you what all species that you have, what does that cost?
I got the price on it, so if you want to just keep going, I'll dig it up. And
Okay.
I think right around, my memory says $400 to $500, but I'll check it out here.
Okay. Probably got time for one more question before break.
It was like 550. Was it 550?
The one that I gave you last week?
Yeah, it was like 564. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, for those that didn't hear, the test was about 550, 560 to test all of them. All right, question over there.
So what, like in a plant, what, I don't know, I'm not gonna be able to ask a question. Like how do they, what environmental factors or what factors contribute to producing viable seed? Same.
It's a great question. I should have probably dug it. We cover this in some of our other classes, and we actually cover this a little more in depth in this class when we do it the full 3-day. So I was trying to pick and choose what to present. Okay, so generally speaking, let me just dial this back. Why even fire? Let's just start with that. Fire doesn't make plants, all right? That's not how it works. Fire creates the opportunity for plants that are there to express themselves. So like when we talk about early spring fire or spring fire, what it does, generally speaking, is it removes competition, warms the soil. You've got a black soot now. You've got earlier warming, earlier plant growth. And for whatever reason, the native plants, because they've evolved with that mechanism, they just respond, okay? And they respond in mass, usually. The theory had been, or I don't want to even use the word theory, there's probably science that I just didn't find as to exactly why does that create more viable, it creates more seed, that plant is just going to reproduce. And they just become filthy with seed usually, compared to a plant or a community that was not burned. That's just pretty well known, and it's proven time and time again. But the viability of the specific seed is what I kind of call into question here, is like, does the seed viability actually become higher? And that's something that's been kind of drilled into us, and I question that just a little bit. I think it has to do with reduced competition. I think it has to do with that burning and resting in that year of the seed. That plant gets to go through its full cycle, and I guess it's magic. I don't know, like it just works. But it's the environment that they've evolved in. Now, one could argue on the grazing side, does it do the same thing? Does it do similar things? And I would say that the volume, like of the pasture that seed got picked out of, I wouldn't waste time. I wouldn't have wasted any amount of time trying to harvest that. It would have been a complete waste of fuel, time, and money. Not even close to a bulky site. But we all saw the results. The seeds that did get produced, they tested pretty well. So I wish I could give you a more precise answer.
Well, when you see that forb flush after a burn or something like that, is that forbs from germination, or is that dormant forbs from root systems? Or
That's a great question. So you can take a native site that had been managed for quite a long time, run a fire across it, or a very intense graze across it, and you're going to see things that you hadn't seen in years. Those are dormant, suppressed plants. They're there. They're growing every year. You just don't know it. You just don't see them. They're usually they're not, I don't think, and Owen and Brett and Joe and whoever, I don't think in those established grasslands we're seeing new germination very often of plants. Kyle, you agreeing with me on that? Very rarely is it new germination. These are old plants that the bud bank or their growth point is just kind of suppressed, and they're just hanging out waiting for an opportunity. Yeah? More or less, right? On a new planting, though, and we get pretty deep into this in our fire, I am a staunch advocate of management of new plantings for the first 3 years, really aggressive, intensive management when the plants tell you that they need it, because it does seem to stimulate long-term success. And then you are talking about that germination era of the first 2 or 3 years, 4 years, or whatever. Yeah, maybe.
So Brett back here, he harvests some seed on the side, and one of the things he notices in drought conditions, viability goes way down. So it's just environmental factors can definitely dictate, the viability of the seed too. So.
Well, I don't mean to ask a question and then kind of answer it too, but just thinking about that a little bit, I guess I was wondering if, in a burn system or something like that, when you take the fire across and you get that flush, I don't know if you're not necessarily getting like young plants, but you're getting like, this fresh growth that hasn't been seen in a while. So, yeah, you get a lot of quantity of seed and stuff, but as far as like viability goes, they're it's almost like they're just finally being able to stretch out for the first time in a while. And so I'm curious as to like whether or not they're able to produce a lot of viable seed. And then when you look at some of those graze systems where, it's an older plant that's maybe been on the landscape for a few years, if that's part of the reason that.
So I guess my theory behind it is it's when a fire would go across a landscape, I think it's just the plant's response to try to fill that open space. Right. So it's like I got to produce more seed, whether it's viable or not. My theory kind of behind that, like I have a bunch of theories, right? Is you go to some of our burned areas and there are so many flowers after a fire. And maybe things just aren't getting pollinated as well because there's so many flower heads.
That's a good point.
But there's still so many flower heads that the bulk amount of seed is still there. So I think, just the plant's response to try to fill, give itself an opportunity to fill that open space that like fire or whatever came across, opens up. So
that's a good point on the pollination stuff.
What did Charlie? He had a question first.
You kind of answered my question already, so I'm just going to try to pick an argument with you. But I feel I can get the same effect with mob grazing as you can with fire. Do you agree or disagree?
So the question is, do you get the same effect with the mob grazing as fire? I disagree, but I don't ever want to get in the fight because I think we should honestly, I think we got to stop comparing two different tools and trying to say which one is better. We tend to do that as grazers and managers, and I've tried to move people away from that debate. There is certain things that fire can do that you can never do with mob grazing, but there's certain things with mob grazing that you can do that you cannot do with fire, right? And I think we tend to go down this rabbit hole of which one's better or which one should I do, and I think first one you do, and you guys that have been mob leaders in mob grazing, I think have really helped managers turn a corner. Agency, all of the people in this room have learned something from good, well-managed grazers like what you're doing, Charlie. I mean, we go to your place every year and we see the impacts of what Charlie's done with cattle. I just think it's different than fire. And there's overlap, right? And we know that there's overlap. Like seed volume, the only way to really know is to do it side by side, and we rarely get a chance to do it side by side on the exact same place. But I think like anything, on a native site, you would never mob graze the same thing the same way year after year, over and over with the same timing. That would be against your tenets of good mob grazing. I would argue that the exact same thing applies to fire. I would never advocate that fire is so, there's nothing magic about it. It's a tool, right? So I think that you don't want to the take home is you don't want to apply the same tool, the same time, the same rate, the same intensity year after year after year, right? And so I don't want to fight with Charlie. He's a big man. Does that help, Charlie? I mean, it's two different things, right? And if you don't have fire in your toolbox because you can't do it yet, mob grazing is obviously not a bad option.
Let me add the third tool. So if you didn't graze and you didn't burn, but you mowed, would mowing get you the same thing?
So we're kind of dancing around the idea of, we're forgetting what our objectives are. We have to ensure that before you take any action, that you actually have an objective, right? So yeah, mowing is a great tool to meet certain objectives, and it's different than grazing, and it's different than fire. Would you go, like, I'm trying to, not to put, I don't know your place necessarily, but like, why would you mow? Well, you know, you're obviously a pheasant hunter. If you want to stimulate flowering plants that you have in the system, mowing can help do that. Well-timed mowing can help stimulate that. Poorly timed mowing can actually set that back. So it starts with, yeah, it's a tool. Mechanical management, just like chemicals, they're all tools. We just got to really understand what our objective is and why we're applying them. You know, one of the things that we have a weed session coming up here later. One of the silliest things, if you want to take the mowing to the extreme, is when I can never figure out at the end of the day why we're out mowing Canada thistle when it's already fluffy and blowing in the wind. You know, and that becomes a social thing. That's a social decision because of weed management, but you're well beyond the ability of impacting anything positively at that point, you know, and that would just be a very extreme example. We use mowing in early restorations pretty frequently to help suppress competition and stimulate growth of the desirable plants. Does that help? Is that it?
If you mowed at the same time you would burn early in the spring, do you get the same effect, better or worse?
When you want to, I've answered a lot of questions. You want to take one of them?
Okay, so he asked if you mowed at the same, well, yeah, if you mowed at the same time as you would burn, would you get similar results? And somewhat. It's kind of tricky. I do think, I'm going to refer to mowing as haying, right? Mowing and haying is quite different because mowing, you're leaving, you know, trash on the, you know, on the field that you're mowing. It's all kind of getting recycled. And again, my opinion here, and we've done trials on some of our GPAs where we basically hayed June 1st, right? It's kind of against everything we preach because, you know, that's when pheasants are nesting, right? But if you're trying to manage for a warm season grass, that is the best time to do it, right? You're kind of targeting the brome when you're haying that early. You know, when you wait till July 15th, you're almost promoting your brome because it's already went to seed. However, both fire and haying is non-selective. So that is the reason why we're probably starting to use hay as a tool more than we ever have. The nice thing about haying is you're removing biomass, right? And I know one of the things that we talk about is recycling, and with haying you're constantly taking stuff out. But at least in the northeast part of South Dakota, like our systems are getting so nitrogen rich that I actually think we're doing some of those systems a favor by removing, you know, nitrogen from the system. So that's, I don't know if I really answered your question, but there is with fire a certain amount of like carbon recycling that occurs that I think, you know, stimulates plants differently than hay would. But we have demonstrated, at least on some of our GPAs, that you can get a pretty good response from haying if you change the timing of it.
All right, we're actually going to go to break because we're about 12 minutes over here. So hold your question. I know Brett's got a presentation coming up on management, and so I think a lot of this will be addressed then as well. So that's a good time. So we're going to take a break till 9:40, and then we'll get underway with planting techniques.